Joining us right now, former Deputy Chief of Staff to President George W. Bush and Fox News contributor Karl Rove. Karl, good to see you this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Morning.
First, your reaction to this embassy move.
Well, historic. And one of the great ironies is that the ground was prepared for this over the last 8 years by two unlikely groups of people, the Palestinians, whose intransigence on finding any solution to live in peace and security with the State of Israel soured their Mideast allies, or at least those that were willing to be supportive of some of their efforts, soured them enormously. And second of all, President Obama, whose policies in the Middle East has achieved the impossible, and that is to convince the State of Israel, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, both that the United States was a completely unreliable ally. So in the last year, President Trump, starting first with his visit to Saudi Arabia and then his subsequent actions, has convinced both Israel and Saudi Arabia that he can be a reliable ally. And as a result, neither the Saudis nor the Jordanians nor the Egyptians or the Gulf states have given any support to the efforts of the Palestinians to stir up trouble about this move.
So, Karl, we had a guest on earlier who said the last three presidents had received intelligence that it was a bad idea to move our embassy to Jerusalem. Do you think this is a bad move?
No, I think conditions have changed. In the past, you had Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Egypt, all of them strongly opposed, privately discouraging the American president from doing this. I don't detect any similar activity this time around, and it's because, again, conditions have changed. The Saudis have come to believe that America's presence in the Middle East is absolutely essential to the security and the peace and stability of the region. And they have also become convinced, as a lot of other major players in the Middle East have, that Hamas and the Palestinian Authority are unreliable, that they can't govern on behalf of their people or speak on behalf of their people, and particularly the Iranian influence in the Gaza worries them enormously. So conditions have changed. We would have had King Abdullah and the Saudi royal family and the president of Egypt, pounding the White House as they did in previous years. Not this time around. And again, it's ironic because the past 8 years have sort of convinced them that if America wants to take this move, America is going to take this move, and things will adjust, and they and we will move on.
Yeah, you know what? Can we switch gears to trade? Because, Karl, we've been talking about the president's tweet about ZTE this morning. He announced that he's working to give China telecom company ZTE a way to get back into business fast. And we know that this company has done business with Iran and initially was sanctioned because of that. Now the president wants to help this company. What's your take on it?
Well, and also they were found supplying North Korea, violating sanctions. Now, I think we got to step back. We ought not to look just at ZTE. We ought to look at two big important things. One is that the Chinese are stealing American intellectual property, forcing American companies that want to do business in China to give up their intellectual treasure house.
Exactly.
And second of all, that the Chinese are bent upon gaining dominance in telecommunications, particularly in the coming 5G battle. And what these companies, ZTE and Huawei, are undercutting with state support private companies like Ericsson and Nokia and the other major equipment suppliers around the world in order to gain this kind of dominance. They want to take and make China the center of innovation and technological advances in 5G. And I think the president, I understand he feels he's got a great relationship with Xi, and I understand he wants to help out Qualcomm, but he ought to keep those two bigger imperatives in mind as he and his people approach this problem.
That's why the Treasury, blocked the Qualcomm deal, right, with Broadcom because of national security issues. So is the president about to give away the store here by doing away with this national security concern?
Yeah, look, I saw one thing that troubled me deeply in the coverage yesterday that said the president would help out ZTE, and one of the ways that he would help out ZTE is to diminish or end the administration's efforts to rein in the Chinese on IP. On March 23rd, the administration put forward a challenge an action at the World Trade Organization that trade lawyers tell me is a very well-prepared and well-drafted action to stop the Chinese from stealing intellectual property of American companies. Now, we got a lot of difficulties getting it done because the WTO doesn't have really strong standards on this. I mean, this is the problem with rapidly changing technology, is that the regulatory framework doesn't keep up with it.
Right.
But that's where the focus ought to be, not on rescuing a company whose object is to basically undermine America's leadership in telecom and wipe out the Western advantage on telecommunication equipment provision.
Concerning.
Do we really want Chinese equipment? Do we really want Huawei or ZTE equipment in the American telecom industry when the future war is going to first be fought? Any future war is going to be first fought in cyberspace, and this would give them complete and utter access to America's telecom infrastructure.
And initially, it looked like the president was well aware of this and knew this, and that's why the Treasury stopped the Qualcomm deal, and that's why he was pushing back on China. But I don't know. Is he just playing poker here or what?
Well, and they were using national security as the reason that most of the trade sanctions were being put in place, and now we're rolling it back.
Well, we don't know that we're rolling it back, but that's what's at stake here.
It's not only looks weak.
This is the mismatch. We were using national security as a standard when it came to aluminum steel, which it really didn't apply. But now we're trying to. Now we're not going to apply it where it really does matter.
That's exactly right.
Let's wait and see what happens.
This makes us look weak, and it does eventually weaken national security.
Yeah.
I suspect he rethinks it. This sounds like somebody's whispering in his ear some bad idea about dealing with this ZTE situation. I bet if he listens to more than one advisor, I bet you he changes his mind.
It looks like Secretary Mnuchin is in charge of this. He's leading that. He led that delegation in Beijing. So we'll be watching this. This is important. We know this. And this is, go ahead, Carl. Final word on this. Go ahead.
Yeah, one issue. Wilbur Ross is the lead on this. This is where Commerce Department is where the statements came, where the action took place, and where the leadership was on this. And so there's a conflict here because, I mean, as some of the reporting this morning made clear, in essence, the president's unilateral move just sort of cut Wilbur's legs off on this issue.
You're right. Wilbur and, well, maybe it was Mnuchin's idea. Anyway, what were you going to say?
No, I was just trying to, if you throw China a bone with ZTE, the question is, what are we getting in return for that?
Of course.
Right? It's very unclear.
Well, you're also picking and choosing winners and losers here. Blanket policies that are tough, particularly on China and a company that's helping our sworn enemies, Iran and North Korea. Again, like you have to get tough and stay tough.
And it's much more important, the transfer technology, than the $375 billion trade deficit. Right? I mean, much more important is the fact that China is stealing our IP and transferring technology. Look, go ahead. Final word.
Only thing I was just going to say is, unless this is the president throwing a bone to China right now to get them back to the table, because I mean, it seemed like things were going awry before he was doing this.
Yeah, well, we'll see.